Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the live stream of the Jimmy Dore Show. I'll be bringing our next guest, ladies and gentlemen. He's a contributor to The Gray Zone. He is the winner of the I.F. Stone Izzy Award for Independent Journalism, and he is the host of Pushback, which can be found over at The Gray Zone's YouTube channel. And he's here with us right now. It's Aaron Mate. Hi, Aaron. How are you?
JD, I'm good. How are you?
Oh, it's good. Good to see you. All right. So there's been some developments in the Russiagate narrative. Some people are getting indicted, finally, for making up the story, for concocting it. So I just want to, so there's been another indictment. We've covered it already, but I'm going to cover how Rachel Maddow covered it. So at the end of this, I'm going to show you the video, and we're going to go over it. Rachel Maddow's video coverage of this very same story and how ridiculous it is. So Rachel Maddow's Shocking New Low was the title of it, and Matt Taibbi's article. He said yesterday, this is the story. Yesterday, Special Counsel John Durham indicted Brookings Institute analyst Igor Danchenko, better known as the primary source for Christopher Steele, the ex-spy who compiled the now infamous Steele dossier on behalf of Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2016. So this guy, Christopher Steele, compiled this Steele dossier that said there was the P tape and all that stuff, and they used that to get FISA warrants on people inside the Trump campaign. So that was this guy who gave the information to this guy just got indicted. This guy, Igor Danchenko, gave bogus information to this guy, Christopher Steele, who then put together the dossier, which was being paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign, which the Hillary Clinton campaign lied about for a year straight. Just so you know, they lied. They were paying this guy, Christopher Steele, to put together the dossier when they were. And this guy was lying to Christopher Steele, giving him bogus information to put in the dossier that Hillary Clinton was paying for. So now you got it? Okay. The case has implications for higher-ranking figures, but the indictment is mostly immediately devastating to the reputation of the many famous news personalities who hyped the Steele story, meaning the dossier. Much of the indictment concerns false statements Danchenko allegedly made to the FBI concerning his interactions with PR Executive One, described as a U.S.-based individual who was a longtime participant in Democratic Party politics and was then an executive at a U.S. public relations firm. At one point, it was believed this claim was sourced to an anonymous phone call Danchenko thought came from the former president of the Russian-American Chamber of Commerce, Sergei Milan. Danchenko, moreover, reportedly told the FBI that he and the anonymous caller made an appointment to meet in New York. The indictment, however, asserts that Danchenko never even spoke to Milan, repeatedly emailing him and getting no response. So this guy, Danchenko, who was giving info to Christopher Steele, who put together the dossier, Christopher Steele, who's being paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign, this guy, Danchenko, was making up stories that he was talking to this guy. He wasn't. Said he was in New York to talk to that guy. He wasn't. What was he doing when he was in New York? He wasn't talking to this guy. What was he doing? Well, he had traveled to New York with a family member. On or about July 26, 2016, Danchenko visited, among other places, the Bronx Zoo with the family member. During this trip, Danchenko did not meet or communicate with that Millian guy, the chamber president. Every reporter who touched that allegation should be ashamed. And Rachel is at the front of that huge crowd. Among other things, she emphasized the importance of Steele's broader assertions, repeating the claim that the Russian regime has been cultivating, supporting, and assisting Trump for at least 5 years, going so far as to praise Steele for keeping his head down and listening to his deep cover sources like Danchenko. So this is totally bogus, but Rachel Maddow has a history of saying what a great piece of information this is and what a great job Christopher Steele did, even though it's all been revealed to be paid for propaganda opposition research by the Clinton campaign. There was nothing in it that was factual, that was new news. However, that's not the most damning part. It turns out at least one assertion by Christopher Steele, a relatively minor observation in an August 2016 report that claimed a senior member of Trump's inner circle was glad when Paul Manafort resigned as campaign manager, came directly from Dolan via Danchenko. Now, who is Dolan, Aaron?
So Charles Dolan turns out to be one of the key sources for the Steele dossier. And the irony on top of the fact that it was a Clinton campaign paying for the Steele dossier, and that, people like Rachel Maddow were claiming that Steele had access to all these high-level Kremlin sources. Charles Dolan actually was a longtime Clinton world operative. He was the chair of Bill Clinton's presidential campaign twice in Virginia. He was appointed by Bill Clinton to a top State Department board position. And ironically, for all the, fear-mongering and conspiracy theories about Trump's supposed ties to Russia, this guy Charles Dolan also worked for the Russian government as a PR executive. And it turns out that the information that he gave to Danchenko was then used by Danchenko. It was embellished. He gave them some benign information about Russia, which then Danchenko and Steele embellished to come up with things like the P-tape.
Okay. The indictment shows an email chain in which Danchenko tells Dolan he's working on a project against Trump and is looking for any thought, rumor, allegation that might be useful. Dolan replies after Manafort's resignation that I had a drink with a GOP friend of mine who told him a number of people wanted Manafort gone. It is a very sharp elbows crowd. On one hand, this exchange almost makes Christopher Steele look not dishonest because it shows there was at least some attempt by some of the people involved in this project to gather information from someone at some point. However, the indictment goes on to quote Dolan about that tidbit. PR Executive One later acknowledged to the FBI that he never met with a GOP friend in relation to this information that he passed to Danchenko, but rather fabricated the fact of the meeting in his communications with Danchenko. PR Executive One instead obtained the information about Campaign Manager One from public news sources. So PR Executive One is Dolan, right?
PR Executive One is Charles Dolan. And again, during the time when we were being told that Christopher Steele had access to all these Kremlin officials, it turns out that for one of, some of the dossier's most key claims, like the P-tape, it was coming from a Clinton world figure. So the Clinton campaign is paying for this thing, and someone with deep ties to the Clintons is also applying information that goes into it.
Okay, so that's what I want everybody to get. It turns out the Steele dossier was paid for by Hillary Clinton, and the people who provided the most salacious information were also working for the Clintons.
Yeah, well, Jim, it's even worse than that because Dolan didn't tell them about the P-tape. What happened was he was in Russia, and he went to the Ritz-Carlton. He got a tour of the hotel, and a hotel manager told him about the fact that Trump once stayed there and noted which room that it was in. And then Dolan, talking to his friend Danchenko, told him about that. And then shortly after that, the Steele dossier says that Trump was in the Ritz-Carlton, but that also there was this P-tape incident there. So basically, Danchenko and Steele took benign information that they picked up from a Clinton world figure and spun that into their fantasies about a P-tape. And that basically was the modus operandi for the entire dossier. And it was obvious at the time, I've been pointing this out forever, that basically nothing that Steele says that was true hadn't already come out publicly. And what Steele did was basically take public information that was in the newspapers and spin that into a fantasy about a Trump-Russia conspiracy. So, for example, he knew that from the newspapers that Carter Page, a Trump volunteer, was in Moscow. So after that, he writes that Carter Page was in Moscow. And there, as a part of this deep Trump-Russia conspiracy, he was promised a huge stake in the Russian state oil company if he could lift sanctions on Russia.
So a source whose lawyer has confirmed his identity is saying outright that he fabricated a story that made it into the Steele dossier. This is degrees worse even than the assertions of the previous Durham indictment of former Hillary Clinton campaign lawyer Michael Sussman. If I were Rachel Maddow, and had a record of saying things on air like, above all else, we know this about the now famous dossier. Christopher Steele had this story before the rest of America did, and he got it from Russian sources. News like the Dolan item would make me furious. Not only did she flog the Steele document for years, she specifically hyped its credibility on the grounds of how it was put together and by whom. She loves to do that. She loves to pump up people who she has on her show as bigger than they are and more important and very official. Now we find out that the actual construction of the reports was like something out of a Three Stooges episode with Iger, Chuck, and the Bronx Zoo Zebra standing in for Mo, Larry, and Curly. The mere fact that some of Steele's supposed Russian sources turned out to be this absurd stateside parade would have any honest journalist fuming. So if you cared about journalism and accuracy, when you found out that all the sources that are supposed to be Russian sources turned out to be this absurd stateside parade of frickin' Clinton people, you would be fuming. Rachel not only isn't upset about this, she's expressing pride in having been burned and is digging in for more. Do you want to watch? So here, now let's remember, this is Rachel Maddow. She's going to be today. She's going to cover this very story that we just explained to you. And so the whole dossier, now this Christopher Steele dossier, which was paid for by Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton's campaign lied that they paid for it for a year, now has been, the information in it was coming from people who connected to Clinton. That's the story. And you should be humiliated if you were a journalist who pushed this for 4 years as actually substantive reporting. So now she's going to try to report this. This guy Dushenko being indicted for this. And she's also going to talk about Hillary Clinton's lawyer, who was indicted a few weeks ago when he went to the FBI and planted a fake story about a bank and Trump's involvement with the bank, the foreign bank. He planted a false Russiagate story, knowing it was false, and lied and said he wasn't working for Hillary Clinton to the FBI. So now it's starting to find all these Russia stories have been manufactured by the Clinton campaign and then told to the FBI and news sources, and then they repeat them as real. So here we go. And by the way, so just remember that Rachel Maddow got sued for defamation, and her lawyer argued in court that she wasn't doing real news, and the judge agreed. The judge agreed and said what she does is called sparkly stories. That's a quote from the ruling. That's really, I'm not kidding. So now here's a fun video from Rachel Maddow, NBC's top-rated speaker whose statements cannot reasonably be interpreted as allegations of fact. That's a quote from the ruling. Her statements cannot reasonably be interpreted as allegations of fact. According to that's the judge in her defamation. So here we go.
The special counsel that was appointed during the Trump administration, the prosecutor tasked by Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr with investigating the Russia investigation itself to try to prove the whole thing was a hoax, like Trump said all along, to try to prove that it was criminal to investigate the...
No. You see what she's doing, right? Okay. All right.
Russia matter. That special prosecutor, John Durham, has just issued his second indictment, and the man he arrested and charged today was a primary source for Christopher Steele's intelligence reports in 2016. Now, Durham's most recent indictment before this one was, in my opinion, a little weird, problematic. That one concerned a Democratic lawyer and cybersecurity expert who was in possession of research that purported to show a possible surreptitious communication.
So I just want you to keep in mind how long she has us these meaningless, ridiculous graphics during this report. It's almost as if she doesn't want you to watch this segment. Because she's making it as visually uninteresting as you possibly can. She keeps showing this black and white graphics that doesn't give you any information. And she does this throughout this report. And And by the way, she's suspicious. Now Rachel is suspicious of the Justice Department, the Joe Biden Justice Department. She wasn't suspicious of the FBI or the CIA or any of that shit when Trump was president. But now she's suspicious of someone working in the Justice Department under Joe Biden and Merrick Garland. So Rachel, she's suspicious about people who eat Russian fucking salad dressing, is accusing someone else of making bogus allegations. Here we go.
Channel between the Trump Organization and a Kremlin-linked Russian bank. Special counsel John Durham charged this lawyer with making a false statement because when he brought this evidence to the FBI, he allegedly was inconsistent in his statements to them about whether he was bringing this information to the FBI on his own behalf or on behalf of his firm's Democratic clients.
His firm's Democratic clients. I wonder why she doesn't mention who the firm's Democratic clients are. Because you know who they are? Hillary effing Clinton. He was there at the FBI at the behest of Hillary Clinton. He lied and said he wasn't. And then he billed Hillary Clinton for his trip to the FBI to plant that fake story. She leaves out all of that. Isn't that interesting? Go ahead, Aaron.
And Jimmy, note how she calls it research and evidence, that this guy, Michael Sussman, was just passing on research and evidence as if basically these computer researchers supposedly came across some information and then had to share it with the FBI because they were so concerned. And this is the theory, that there was a covert communications channel between the Trump Organization and a Russian bank. And then that's how they were secretly communicating. This is fraud. These people committed fraud against the FBI. They committed fraud by giving them the Steele dossier, and they committed fraud by doubling down and giving them junk like this. And it's obvious now. That's what's spelled out in the indictment. And the indictment even says of Sussman that these people were tasked to concoct a, quote, narrative that would, quote, please certain VIPs. Who are those VIPs? The people in the Clinton campaign who was paying for all this and who wanted to create a narrative that could tie Trump to Russia. We're looking at this unfold right now, and it's amazing. I don't think it's sunk in yet for people like Rachel Maddow that actually the fraud has been uncovered. It's not just Steele, it's more. It's also this thing like this Alpha Bank, and I'm sure there'll be more as well. But it's amazing. And of course, I guess they have to because they put so much into this for 4 years, this insane conspiracy theory about Trump and Russia conspiring and Trump being being a blackmail victim of Putin, that they have to keep doubling down. But it's going to get worse.
It's going to get worse.
Or another client that he was working for. Everybody at the FBI knew this lawyer and knew exactly who his clients were and who his firm.
Why won't she say who his clients were? Isn't that interesting? She keeps saying everybody knew who his clients were, who he was working for, who did that. It's Hillary Clinton.
Was working for. It was not like a secret that he had those associations with nefarious Democrats. But that indictment from John Durham does its best to turn that into a scandal, that someone with, gasp, ties to Democrats brought in from...
It wasn't ties to Democrats. It's ties to Hillary Clinton's campaign that he lied about. He said he wasn't working for her, and he billed her for that meeting where he said he wasn't working for her.
And he's not giving evidence.
Yes.
He's giving a scam.
That's right.
He's giving a scam.
He's planting a false story with the FBI. That's not him giving evidence or research. That's Hillary Clinton's lawyer went to the FBI, planted a false story about Donald Trump and Russia, and then lied to the FBI about he was working for Hillary Clinton. Do you see how she's not reporting any of those facts?
You know, Jimmy, you know what's so funny? These people have been caught just blatantly lying to the media, and the media outlets who were lied to have not called them out. So these supposed computer researchers who were told innocently came across some signs of a Trump-Russia covert channel, okay? They were actually working for a cyber executive who wanted to become the top cyber czar in the Clinton administration. That's why he was pushing them to concoct something that could tie Trump to Russia. And even when they told him, look, there's nothing here, he told them basically to do anything that could come off as plausible. And so what they told the New Yorker and Slate, this was printed in the New Yorker and Slate, still hasn't been retracted, is that their cover story, their cover story was, this is what they said, was that they were just guardians of the internet looking at traffic to keep the web safe. And they happen to come across this suspicious web traffic, especially involving the DNC hack and of the Russian hack of the DNC. And so after they saw this alleged Russian hack of the DNC, that's when they got to work to look for other suspicious Russian activity, because they weren't just trying to look out for the Clinton campaign. They also, they said, were trying to look out for the Trump campaign and protect them from Russian hackers. And that's when they came across this mysterious web traffic between Trump and Russia, when in reality, as the indictment says, this was a narrative that they concocted to try to tie Trump to Russia.
So let's keep going with her sparkly story from Rachel Maddow.
About Trump and Russia to the FBI. And the indictment in that case spins pages and pages and pages of unsupported allegations backed with sort of cherry-picked quotes to try to paint.
She's complaining about cherry-picked quotes and allegations without... Are you kidding me? She's complaining about... And do you see how long they leave this ugly graphic up while she's talking? It's so you don't watch or really pay attention to what's happening.
The alleged communication channel between the Trump organization and that Russian bank as a big smear campaign that was known to be false, but was nevertheless deliberately cooked up by the Clinton campaign to bamboozle the FBI and make Trump look bad. And that, of course, neatly tracks with and supports Trump's insistence that everything Russia-related was a hoax by the deep state and the Democrats. So that was...
It was. Because it was. And that's why Aaron got an award for debunking the kind of bullshit that she's still pushing. That's why nobody in Trump's White House or campaign got indicted or prosecuted or arrested or convicted for colluding with Russia. None of them. None of them. Not Trump, not Mike Pence, not Carter Page, not any of them. Not Don Jr., not Manafort. None of them got indicted or prosecuted or convicted for anything to do with colluding with Russia to overthrow the election. None of them. It was a complete hoax concocted, as we're now finding out bit by bit, by the Hillary Clinton campaign, planting false stories with the press and with the FBI and paying for the Steele dossier while lying that they were paying for it, and then their own operatives giving the information that went into the Steele dossier. So it gave it the look that it was objective, and it wasn't. It was called opposition research, which is not to be relied on. Okay, here we go. Here we go. What they're now, okay, here we go.
Last indictment from John Durham last month. Today's indictment against this primary source and researcher for Christopher Steele's intelligence reports. This is about false statements the source allegedly made to those FBI agents working under Peter Strzok, who were trying to track down the veracity of Steele's reporting back in 2016 and 2017. The guy who was charged today is named Igor Danchenko. He appeared in federal court in Virginia today. He was charged with 5 counts.
First of all, Igor is a great name for a wormy guy who helps you Frankenstein together a bullshit story and give it life.
Making false statements to the FBI about his own sources for certain things that made it into Steele's reporting. And whether Mr. Danchenko did lie to the FBI in those interviews will now be a matter for the courts. But it is also worth noting that this new indictment, just like the last one, spends comparatively little time talking about these alleged false statements and a lot of time talking about people Igor Danchenko came in contact with or talked to who are, horror of horrors, Democrats. People who may have even supported Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2016.
What? Now you're going to try and distract from Trump's collusion with evil Russians by indicting the Clintons' evil Russian? Oh, that's very sneaky of you. Okay.
And by the way, Jimmy, what she says is not true. The indictment goes into heavy detail of all the lies that he told. And they're really funny because, for example, one of the lies he told the FBI that he spoke to this guy, Sergei Milyan, who is not Russian, he's Belarusian. But anyway, they didn't even speak. They didn't actually speak. And Sergei Milyan became, in the media, there was a lot of stories in the Washington Post which the Washington Post actually just retracted effectively. They've drastically changed the stories. They've taken out entire sections. They changed the headlines. Sergei Milian didn't even speak to this guy, Danchenko, when Danchenko said that they did speak, and that was his effort to make himself look credible. So that was one of the many serious lies he told. And they're ignored by people like Rachel Maddow because people like Maddow were pushing the Steele dossier for many years as credible.
Okay, back to Rachel Maddow's fantasy sparkly story.
The unmistakable impression is that this indictment is designed to smear Christopher Steele's intelligence reports as things that were deliberately made up and concocted by rascally Democrats.
Can you believe that they are trying to smear the original smear? Oh, look, everyone who said Trump had ties to Russia actually had ties to the Clintons. Come on, this is just immature, Rachel. Here we go.
Even though none of that has anything to do with the actual charges against Mr. Danchenko.
Given the fact that the election was upon us and that if, in fact, then candidate Trump were elected, that whether he or certainly more likely or possibly members of his campaign were actively working with the Russians, we needed to get to the bottom of that.
We needed to get to the bottom of that. That's Peter Strzok, the lead investigator at the FBI, who opened the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation into the Russian influence operation against the 2016 U.S. presidential election, specifically the...
First of all, Crossfire Hurricane. They're ripping off the Rolling Stones, and they can't even make this shit interesting. Okay, here we go.
...alleged ties between Trump and his campaign and that Russian operation. That work included chasing down the explosive allegations that were made against Trump and his campaign in a dossier of raw intelligence that was compiled by British ex-spy Christopher Steele.
I like how she calls it raw intelligence. She calls all that bullshit in the Steele dossier raw intelligence. It's not just a bunch of lies. It's raw data. Then the FBI cooks it, and Rachel Maddow serves it up to shit libs half-baked. That's how this goes. This is the recipe here for Russiagate. Here we go.
And ultimately...
It's kind of like raw sewage, though, in a way. It has to be processed and then dumped into the news stream as a sparkly story on Rachel Maddow's show. Okay.
You know, Jimmy, by their standard, we should start calling, when they, label everything disinformation that they don't like, we should just start calling it raw intelligence.
It's raw
intelligence.
This is just raw intelligence. Yeah.
Passed on to the FBI.
You know, Alex Jones is key on a lot of that raw intelligence.
Raw intelligence.
Very.
Raw intelligence.
Well, today, the special counsel that was tasked during the Trump years by former Attorney General Bill...
And by the way, Alex Jones's raw intelligence, way more accurate than Rachel Maddow's raw intelligence. Think about that. I'm sure he was right about tons of more shit about Russiagate than she was. Okay.
With investigating the origins of the Russia investigation. That special counsel has indicted an analyst who worked on the Steele dossier. He is accused of lying to the FBI about his own sources for those explosive allegations. Joining us now is Peter Strzok. He spent decades as an FBI counterintelligence officer and was at the center of the FBI's dealings with the Steele dossier. He wrote a book about his experiences that's called Compromised.
Look. Oh, look how on the book, the R, compromised, the R is backwards. Oh, so you know it's about evil Russians. That's how you know. My God, even these people's R's are backwards. Okay, here we go.
Counterintelligence and the threat of Donald J. Trump. Mr. Strzok, it's a real pleasure to have you with us tonight. Thanks for making time.
Rachel, it's great to be here.
So I feel like this is a story that's a few levels removed from how most Americans have come to understand the totality of what happened with the Russian attack and the Russia investigation. I wanted to get your sort of top-line perspective on
his top-line perspective. That, you know what kind of perspective you're going to get from this guy who, by the way, got fired from the FBI for lying? You're going to get his top-line perspective. He lied to the FBI, documented at least 3 times, right, Aaron? Am I right about that?
He lied many times. He also just was caught sending text messages where he was talking about how he was going to use the investigation to stop Trump.
That's right.
From being elected, and he called the Russians cheating, MFing savages, and I hate the Russians. You know, these people are Russophobes, and that's a very underrated part of this whole Trump-Russia thing, just how much intelligence officials freaked out at the fact that Trump was sometimes saying nice things about Vladimir Putin, and the only way they could process that in their Russophobic, chauvinistic brains was that he must be some kind of agent of Russia, or else there's no other explanation for why you would just want to get along with Russia. That's unfortunately what drove a lot of this investigation.
Importance of what Mr. Durham is doing and the importance of what he's done today with this indictment. What do you think people should understand about it?
Well, I think the primary thing people need to understand are that the people that he's indicted to date and charged to date, whether that's Michael Sussman, whether it's Kevin Kleinsmith, an FBI attorney, and today Igor Danchenko, were all involved in matters which were very almost peripheral to the core of what we were looking at with regard to the Russia investigations. And so let me be clear. Lying to the FBI is a significant, significant crime. It's a crime if the National Security Advisor does it.
And it's a crime I know something about because I did it on multiple occasions. And of course, I'm not in jail because I'm on the inside.
It's a crime if, as alleged, Mr. Danchenko did that during his interviews with FBI agents. As you mentioned earlier, I have some concerns with the indictment of Michael Sussman. I'm concerned about whether or not that's a good use of government resources.
Unlike the investigation into Russiagate, what a great use of government resources that was. Okay.
Him. But at the end of the day, it is a crime to lie to the FBI. But what isn't true is the backdrop to all this. You know, in next Saturday, John Durham will have been going on for 2.5 years. Now, compare that to Robert Mueller, who lasted less than 2 years, and in that time, charged and convicted people like Trump's national security advisor, his campaign.
Okay, so he said what's not true is the backdrop. He doesn't ever say what's not true. He then just shifts. I don't know if you caught that. He goes, tomorrow, next Saturday, will mark 2.5 years of John Durham's investigation. As if that's the new state lines, by the way. It doesn't mean anything. So who cares how long his investigation is taking? What does that mean? It means nothing.
Yeah, and also, Jimmy, what they're trying to do now is basically claim that Steele had nothing to do with their investigation.
Yeah.
So that's just not true.
It had everything.
Peter Strzok
Go ahead.
himself personally signed surveillance warrants on Trump campaign volunteer Carter Page. And the number one source for these surveillance warrants signed by Peter Strzok was the Steele dossier. That was the number one source. And they did that. They got 4 surveillance warrants on Carter Page, even after they knew from Danchenko, the Steele dossier's main source, that the Steele dossier was fabricated. So he has reason to try to distance himself now from the Steele dossier is because he relied on it extensively. And it wasn't just for the surveillance warrants of Carter Page. They kept a spreadsheet with every single major claim in the Steele dossier, and they investigated all of them. So these people use the Steele dossier as source material instead of dismissing it. And when he talks about Robert Mueller's secured convictions, he did. You look at those convictions, none of them had anything to do with the Trump-Russia conspiracy. Basically, the Mueller team aggressively used the law to prosecute anyone they could, and then used those indictments to make it look as if they were closing in on a Trump-Russia conspiracy when they actually weren't.
They weren't.
They accused people of lying when actually they really weren't lying. And basically, they created a media spectacle. That's what the point of their indictment was. Now, note who they didn't indict. Igor Danchenko has only just been indicted now. But why? He was interviewed by the FBI at the exact same time as all these other people in the Trump world were interviewed. And those people were indicted by Mueller way back when. Why didn't they indict Danchenko when he's now accused of committing the exact same thing they accused Michael Flynn, Rick Gates, and George Papadopoulos of, lying to the FBI? The reason Mueller didn't indict Danchenko is because they were building a narrative. They were trying to make the FBI's investigation of Trump-Russia look credible. And if they were to indict the main source for the Steele dossier, that would have been inconvenient. And that's why Danchenko is being indicted only now in 2021 instead of being indicted by Mueller back in 2017 when his lies were made.
So I just love that point that look how long this investigation is going on. Oh, my God, what kind of investigation? Robert Mueller, he got 3 times as much bullshit into that report in less time. Here we go.
Campaign manager, his deputy campaign manager, his personal attorney, his personal Roger Stone, personal fixer, and a large number of very significant people that were key and critical to the Trump campaign and later to the administration.
So he's saying all those people were indicted by the Mueller. Again, that's just dishonest framing. None of those people were indicted for colluding with Russia. It was all for ancillary crimes that had nothing to do with the core charge. And of course, he's going to spin it to make it look just like the Mueller report did, just like Rachel Maddow's doing, just like the New York Times and CNN, which is why you're here watching this show, because we're going to point out that this guy's a bullshitter, and you should bring on a person to debunk this fucking bullshitter from the FBI who got fired for lying to the FBI. You don't bring him on as a top-line analyst giving his credible report. This guy is a partisan hack, lying criminal. That's what this guy is, a fucking lying criminal, and so is Rachel Maddow.
When I look at these two players, I see folks that were not involved in any of those cases. You know, Robert Mueller didn't rely on Steele's information at all. The Alpha Bank information, was looked at by the FBI and was determined to be not, didn't appear to be anything, that we weren't quite sure what it was. And then finally, with regard to, Mr. Danchenko's information, it was relevant to Carter Page, but Carter Page made up about 8 pages of an almost 500-page Mueller report. So my worry is that as Americans
that's because they didn't want to acknowledge Carter Page.
That's right.
They used the Steele dossier to spy on him. So, of course, they wanted to minimize his story because it was so embarrassing and damning for the FBI. Carter Page made up 8 pages of the Mueller report, but there was a huge amount of media hoopla around him, fueled by things like intelligence leaks, because they were trying to use him to paint this phony picture of a Trump-Russia conspiracy.
And they don't really know how the Russia investigation ended. They hear these concerns and they say, well, there must be a problem. And that's being picked up and amplified by people who are seizing on this to say, see, the entire effort, everything Mueller did, everything the FBI was nonsense, it was bogus, it was based on lies. And that just couldn't be further from the truth.
Turns out that is the truth, Mr. Liar, Mr. Criminal, Mr. Partisan Hack. Yes, that turns out was totally true. Which is why you should be in prison, and Aaron Mate won an award. That's why. Okay.
Well, that analysis, that take on what's going on here, I feel like is bolstered by the way that these indictments have been presented to the public and presented to the courts. At least in the case of the Sussman indictment and now in the case of this indictment today, the indictment, as it must, lays out narrowly the details of the alleged false statements, the alleged crimes for which these gentlemen have been charged. But these are both what they call speaking indictments. And in the case of Mr. Sussman's indictment a few weeks ago and in the case of this indictment today, Mr. Durham in these indictments lays out basically uncharged, vague allegations that the Alpha Bank allegations about the Trump organization, that all the allegations about Mr. Trump in the Steele dossier, these were deliberate fictions that were knowingly cooked up by bad actors who were all Democrats, who were making this stuff up, knowing that it was false and giving it to the FBI, knowing it was all made up, just to basically implicate the FBI in a dirty trick against Trump. That's the public portrayal I believe he's trying to paint about the Russia investigation.
Because that would be accurate. That would be 100,000% accurate. That's why he's probably doing that. Because that would be accurate. That there were Clinton satellites planting false stories all over the place to make it look like Trump was to paint this false narrative of Russiagate. And they not only did that. The Steele dossier, it was no minor thing. It was a huge thing because they used it to get FISA warrants, which means they got to tap on Trump's entire campaign because of it.
And if you remember, Jimmy, the reason we learned about the Steele dossier is because Jim Comey in early January 2017, back as Trump was making fun of the intelligence community, including making fun of the Russian hacking claims and questioning the so-called intelligence for that, Jim Comey then went and briefed Trump about the Steele dossier and said that the FBI has it and is looking into it. And then that conversation got leaked, and that became BuzzFeed's excuse for publishing the dossier in full. So it basically set off the public narrative around Trump and Russia, at least to a whole new level. This is early January 2017 when the dossier was published. And now they're trying to pretend as if for the FBI it wasn't a big thing. Well, the director of the FBI briefed the incoming president about it, and somebody in the FBI then leaked that right to CNN which then got BuzzFeed to publish it. So this was a huge part of the whole thing. And basically, I see all that came after that and these attempts now to distance the FBI from the Steele dossier as basically an attempt to fabricate something new that could justify the initial decision to open up the Trump-Russia investigation, which was baseless to begin with, that could retroactively erase the reliance on the Steele dossier so that they could point to other things and other instances of indictments and information that they could then say made the Trump-Russia investigation credible. But if you look at all the cases they brought, all the indictments, none of them had anything to do with the Trump-Russia conspiracy. None. They were disingenuously written to suggest that there was a Trump-Russia conspiracy. And that's why in the end, the whole thing collapsed because there was no Trump-Russia conspiracy.
Not one person arrested, indicted, or prosecuted for a Russia-Trump conspiracy. Not one. Okay.
At least these two elements of it, the Steele dossier and the Alpha Bank allegations. Am I right to read that in these sort of speaking indictments? Is that also the way that you see it? And do you feel like that overall allegation is fair for Mr. Durham?
I agree with you. I think I'm certainly concerned when I read these indictments, both Mr. Sussman's and Mr. Danchenko's. I mean, look, Mr. Danchenko's indictment is 39 pages long. If you go through those 39 pages and pull out those facts that are actually relevant to the false statements that he's alleged to have made to the FBI, that's a smaller subset, much smaller subset of those 39 pages. And whether in...
What the fuck? What kind of bullshit? You know that came from a PR firm. Say it was 39 pages, and then say it was 8 pages as a subset. And so what he's basically said, I'm concerned the American people might think we're liars just because we lied a lot. But those lies were only a small percentage of the total lies we told, and the main part of the lies were true. 39 pages, Aaron. But the 9 pages of the 8 pages was just a couple of lies in those 8 pages. Come on.
Yeah. Listen, I've written about all these indictments so far. You can read it at my Substack, mattsaid.substack.com. And I found these indictments to be very detailed, and I certainly got a lot of material from them. And what's funny is contrast that with the indictments that came out during the Mueller investigation. So they knew, for example, that Roger Stone had no back channel to WikiLeaks.
They knew
and
that.
The idea that he did was such a joke. His supposed potential intermediaries were Randy Credico, a left-wing radio host, and Jerome Corsi, a right-wing, author or something. And they wanted us to believe that somehow through these two characters, Roger Stone and Julian Assange were secretly communicating. Okay, and everyone knew there was nothing there, that was not true. But when they indicted Roger Stone for lying to Congress, the Mueller team wrote this long indictment that whoever wrote it was a skilled lawyer, because it disingenuously suggested that there was some kind of Roger Stone WikiLeaks back channel. But by the end, they basically acknowledged that there was none. And that was a very lengthy indictment. And a lot of these indictments were written to suggest that there was something to a Trump-Russia conspiracy that they knew was not there.
Let's keep it going. There's a little more to this.
Intentionally or not, when you look at the balance of those pages, they have subtle dog whistles to these kind of pro-Trump conspiracy theories. Statements like, the FBI's investigation of the Trump campaign.
So he's talking about the indictments that Durham has given to people for concocting a false Russiagate narrative and lying to the FBI people. And he's saying that inside those indictments, they're giving dog whistles to Trump conspiracy theories, right? Now, imagine what he's saying. He's saying that Merrick Garland and Joe Biden's Justice Department is allowing someone who works under them to forward Donald Trump conspiracy theories. That's what he's alleging right now. Isn't that what he just said, Aaron?
That's exactly what he's doing.
Do you realize how fucking crazy this is? That he's alleging that Joe Biden's Justice Department and Merrick Garland are allowing a guy, John Durham, who's working under them, to then officially forward in official documents and in indictments crazy Trump conspiracy theories, meaning conspiracy theories from Trump, not conspiracy theories about Trump, which is what Russiagate is. He's saying that the Joe Biden administration is now pushing pro-Trump conspiracy theories. That's what he's saying. This goes unchallenged. Yeah. This goes unchallenged.
And Jimmy, if you remember back during the Mueller probe, remember when we were told every day that we were on the brink of fascism because Trump was going to maybe fire Mueller. And if he did, that was like an emergency, a national emergency. It was a national crisis. And if you remember when Jeff Sessions was fired after the November 2018 midterms, the next day liberals rallied to save his job. That was one of the biggest liberal protests of the Trump era, to save Jeff Sessions' job. Now they're basically doing what they were fear-mongering about Trump, which is that they're basically suggesting that the special counsel is illegitimate and should be fired and should be shut down. When, during the Trump era, the idea of a special counsel being shut down was like the number one issue. It meant it was such a dire issue that it meant we had to go out in the streets to rally to save the job of Jeff Beauregard Sessions.
You can't, honestly, I'm not creative enough to make this stuff up. But here we go.
Relied on certain things. Well, there was never an FBI investigation of the Trump campaign, unless you listen to some, kind of far extreme right commentators.
So he just said, and I don't know if you missed it, but he said there never was an FBI investigation into the Trump campaign. So now I'm going to guess what he's going to say instead, which will be a lie. He said, no, we were investigating Russian interference into the election. We weren't investigating the Trump campaign. It's just that every person we were investigating was in the Trump campaign, and every person we got a FISA warrant for was in the Trump campaign. But we weren't investigating the Trump campaign. That's a far right-wing conspiracy theory. Again, she doesn't push back on any of that. And now you know why this guy got fired from the FBI, and because he's a professional fucking liar. And that's why he's welcome on MSNBC, because he's willing to lie with a straight face and look like a Boy Scout with his little earnest voice, that Bill Clinton earnest voice that him and Oliver North and Bill Clinton have perfected, and now this piece of shit has perfected. He doesn't want you to think that he's a lying piece of shit, which he is. This is remarkable.
In Congress who assert that there was, but that's nonsense. The indictment makes a point to note that the FBI...
He's going to make you think that's a far-right conspiracy theory that the FBI was investigating the Trump campaign. And so that is probably how he's going to... No. If you look at the documents, we were only allowed to investigate the Russian interference. That's why that's what he would say, right, Aaron?
That he's trying to pretend now that somehow the Trump campaign wasn't a target, and that's crazy. I mean, they opened it up against...
There's text messages of him saying, we're going to stop Donald Trump. We're not going to let him become president. There's text messages of that fucking same guy saying that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, here we go. A little bit more.
It's unable to corroborate Steele's reporting, but at the same time it neglects to mention that we weren't able to disprove it either. So as you look through...
Oh my God.
I don't know if you just heard what he said. Okay, again, I'm going to explain to you what he's saying in that pretend earnest voice. He said we couldn't confirm the Steele dossier because it was all bullshit. He said, but we couldn't disprove it. Well, you can't disprove a negative. That's the whole point. You don't disprove anything. That's just like them saying, well, Mueller didn't exonerate Trump either. That's not what you do in an indictment. You don't exonerate. You just go, there's evidence to indict or there isn't. You don't go, he's exonerated.
They did disprove it, though. That's the thing. Even by his own standard, he's lying, because the main source for the dossier, Danchenko, told them in January 2017 that corroboration for everything was zero, and a lot of it was just made up. So they knew that. They knew that.
And he's still saying this.
He doesn't even know his own investigation, or he's lying about his own
investigation. He's just lying. He knows that the people who watch Rachel Maddow aren't going to fucking listen to this with a fine-tooth comb like we are and find all his lies.
Yeah.
These subtle sort of one-sided portrayals of the facts that lay down a narrative that plays into this sort of...
So this is all this one-sided portrayal of the facts. Are you shitting me? Do you think you're getting an objective reporting of the facts with Rachel Maddow and this fucking criminal liar?
Prior assertions by President Trump, by the prior administration, by his enablers in Congress and the media, that this was all somehow nonsense. And that can't be unintentional, in my opinion. And it is concerning, and I think it's seeking to lay out a false narrative about the entire effort of what the FBI and Special Counsel Mueller did.
Peter Strzok, former head of the FBI's counterintelligence division. Thank you.
And fired liar who committed the exact crimes he is bragging about other people being indicted for. So there you go. That's why Rachel Maddow is not only a horrible journalist, but a horrible person and an insidious figure in this country right now, deleterious to our nation's health. And this guy's a fucking straight up criminal who's not your friend, and he should be in jail. But he's not, because he lied at the behest of the establishment. So he's not. But he is a huge fucking liar. And go ahead, Aaron.
Jim,
anything you want to say?
I don't know about prison. I don't want to advocate prison for anybody except,
I do.
Like work on. But I will say they do need some kind of psychological or re-education help, because they're in a cult. They're in a cult called Blue Anon that believes that Donald Trump was a blackmail victim of the Russians, a conspirator of the Russians, that Russian bots and memes have brainwashed millions of Americans into rejecting the amazing Hillary Clinton and the neoliberals in the Democratic Party. And even though so much information comes out showing their cult orthodoxy to be a scam, they keep doubling down with more excuses and lies. So they need help. I want help for these people. And then jail.
I would jail first. I think they're beyond help. It's not that I don't think they're mentally ill at all. I think they know exactly what they're doing. They just don't have integrity. Rachel Maddow sold out her integrity a long time ago. And this guy, the FBI guy, they're all professional liars. Are you kidding me? Especially the people who get to the top of the FBI. Chris Wallace revealed James Comey to be the biggest liar in the world. Robert Mueller also helped lie us into the Iraq War. People forget that. And now this guy she brings on as a top line analyst. You mean a top line fired liar? Who got caught in text messages saying that his goal inside the FBI was to stop Trump from becoming president? You mean that guy? So you cannot trust the mainstream news. And it seems like I'm the only one left taking on MSNBC. I'm talking about the nutless wonders on YouTube. And you know exactly who they are. I don't think TYT are nutless. TYT is just completely fucking bought and compromised. They are the establishment. Now they're pals with people like Rachel Maddow. They're pals with people like Chris Cuomo. They're pals. So I don't know if you see any of the nutless wonders on YouTube. Have they addressed this? No, because they're still too scared to even debunk Russiagate. The fucking cowards. Anyway, all right, Aaron, everybody check out his Substack, aaron.mate.substack.com. I'm a member.
Just the last name, JD. Just
there's no Aaron.
Substack.com.
Just Mate?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Mate.substack.com. There you go. There's no other.
And thegrayzone.com too, where you can find my show Pushback and all the reporting of me and my colleagues. And yeah, listen, Jimmy, it's an exciting time. If you were one of the people who stayed sane during the Russiagate era and you recognize that it was a scam, it's actually a time where we're finally getting some disclosures, a window into how the scam began. And I think there'll be a lot more in the coming months. So, we all got to stay tuned.
But come on. I mean, Durham's been doing this for 2.5 years, Aaron. Isn't that a long time?
Shut it down. You're right, Jimmy. Shut it down.
We should just arbitrarily stop because it's been 2.5 years.
Yeah, shut it down.
Okay. All right, buddy. Great to talk to you.
You too, JD.
All right.
See you soon.
Hey, come see us do a live stand-up show in Portland, Oregon, the 26th and 27th of November. That's Thanksgiving weekend. See you there. And please join our premium program. Get a lot of extra stuff. We'll talk to you later.